So later on April 19th, 1775, roughly 400 militiamen gathered at Concord near the North Bridge that goes over and crosses the Concord River. From there, they can see black smoke coming from their village of Concord. They don't know, but they're taking wild guesses that the smoke they see is the British burning the town down. What they don't know is that the British are burning all the stockpiles and munitions as they were told to by Thomas Gage. But it infuriates the militiamen, or what I should call them, the Minutemen. And they gather here in this field behind me, and they wait. And they wait for the British to come marching up for a fight that's going to be one of the hardest fights of the war. And you have a whole bunch of angry, vengeful men. Well, you're going to be going against a foe that almost feels like they got nothing to lose. And with that bridge down there, that's where it's all going to begin. Lexington had already happened. That was just a couple shots shot off. But what America's really going to happen to fall into is as fast as a gunshot into the War of the Revolution. This would be the shot heard around the world. And we're here at Old North Bridge in Concord. Again, I have American Spring, Lexington, Concord, and the Road to Revolution by Walter R. Borneman as my reference to what happened and took place here at Concord. At the North Bridge, Captain Walter Laurie of the 43rd Regiment was growing increasingly nervous. He had only 40-some men to defend this key point, and the numbers of rebel militia looking down from Punkatasset Hill appeared to be growing with each passing minute. Captain Parsons and 3 companies were up the road about 2 miles to the west at Barrett's Farm, while 2 other companies, those of the 10th and 4th Regiments, had been left tenuously positioned atop 2 knolls about 400 yards beyond the bridge in advance of Laurie's position. Laurie had no communication with them or with Colonel Smith in his rear. He was feeling alone and surrounded when once again Lieutenant William Sutherland put himself at the center of things. And by now, the rebel militia closest to the North Bridge numbered about 500 men. These were divided into 2 regiments of 5 companies each. One was the regiment of Minutemen companies, commanded by Major John Buttrick of Concord. His home stood about a quarter mile to the north of the bridge on the far side. Under his command were companies from Acton, Bedford, Lincoln, and 2 from Concord. The regiment of regular militia was composed of 5 older, slower companies from the same towns under the command of Colonel Joseph Barrett. As a senior officer present, Barrett assumed overall command of both regiments. If Barrett and Buttrick represented older, more cautious warriors who had seen the face of war, their adjutant was a young, hot-spurred lieutenant named Joseph Hosmer. And as Barrett and Buttrick held a council with their officers, not everyone in the ranks was ready to fight. One of the men from nearby Lincoln, James Nichols, who was remembered as an amusing sort of fellow and a fine singer. "If any of you will hold my gun," Nichols remarked to his neighbors that morning, "I will go down and talk to them," meaning the British. Someone took his gun, and Nichols strolled down to the bridge by himself and had quite a conversation with the regulars. No one knows what he said, and Lieutenant Sutherland, in his detailed account, made no mention of this lone rebel dropping by for a chat. But afterward, Nichols returned to his militia unit, retrieved his gun, and said simply that he was going home, and he did. On the rise to the west of the North Bridge, Colonel Barrett and Major Buttrick were still conferring with their officers. Their companies were formed in a line with those of Buttrick's regiment of Minutemen on the right and Barrett's regular militia on the left as they faced the bridge. Lieutenant Joseph Hosmer interrupted this conference, pointed to a cloud of black smoke rising from near the town common. Unaware that Mrs. Moulton was goading her unwelcome guests to a bucket brigade, the observers surmised that the British had set fire to one or more buildings in town. It is interesting that most contemporary and secondary accounts of the battle at Concord's North Bridge focus almost exclusively on the rebel militia facing the bridge and the town beyond it. Little is said of the British force at their rear. The 120-some men then deployed with Captain Parsons at Barrett's farm. To be sure, Barrett's and Buttrick's two regiments were being reinforced by companies as full regiments arriving from surrounding towns, and Parsons' numbers soon paled in comparison. But the fact that the militiamen ignored or at least downplayed this potential threat in their rear simply underscores their overriding concern for what the British were doing in the town. So they saw this and it enraged them. Why wouldn't you be? They could see it burning, and Concord's roughly that way from the Concord River. It's about that far. I'd be upset too. Observing the rebel column coming toward them, Captain Laurie and his troops at the bridge were genuinely surprised. This was not Captain Parker's small band who had hastily gathered on Lexington Green and then just as hastily dispersed. Here was a military column of apparently well-drilled and disciplined troops advancing toward their position. If you don't know, I'm right now walking in that path that they are taking, which is actually pretty cool, I have to say, because I have an ancestor who fought at Concord and on the way back to Lexington. They were militiamen, and to be here a little bit before the 250th is surreal. Like, knowing this is where it all began is just something else. Where Americans started fighting back in force. Here was a military column of apparently well-drilled and disciplined troops advancing toward their position. Ensign Jeremy Lister, who was with the company from the 10th, recalled that the rebel advance was made with as much order as the best disciplined troops. With these men advancing towards him, Captain Laurie suddenly recognized what he should have known upon first crossing the bridge. The best defensive position was on the opposite, on the Concord side of the bridge, with the bridge and river to his front and not to his rear. According to Laurie, his fellow company commanders and Lieutenant Sutherland, who among these higher-ranking captains were still being accorded a surprising degree of deference, heartily, if belatedly, concurred. Laurie accordingly ordered the three companies to fall back across the bridge, and indeed they might have retreated all the way to Concord, but for those little acts that suddenly and irrevocably changes the mood of a given moment. So they started to raise the plank. Ripping up these planks was a destruction of property that galled the oncoming militia, and if anything, was just a sort of overt act that seemed to confirm that the smoke rising from the town was no accident. Major Buttrick announced, if we were all his mind, he would drive them away from the bridge. They should not tear that up. Buttrick took no formal vote, but there were murmurs of approval among his men. And Amos Barrett remembered, we all said we would go. Significantly, this rebel force, alarming though it appeared to Captain Laurie and his troops, had not yet loaded its weapons. That changed as Butcher gave the order to load and gave further strict orders not to fire until they fired first, then to fire as fast as we could. Colonel Barrett later testified that his orders had been largely the same: to march to said bridge and pass the same, but not to fire on the King's troops unless they were first fired upon. Accordingly, seeing the regulars continuing to rip up planks on the bridge, Captain Davis and the Acton company of Minutemen quickened our pace and ran towards them. The companies behind them followed suit, and the approach of this determined column and the effort of hurrying the wrecking party of members off the bridge and back to their ranks. Then, as on the green at Lexington that morning, the errant shot rang out. Who fired this first shot is still a matter of conjecture. Thomas Thorpe, who was a member of Captain Davis's Acton company, saw a ball strike the water of the Concord River, which is right here as you see. And then saw a ball strike the water on the Concord River on his right, and then thought some other guns were fired over our heads. Thaddeus Blood, a private in Captain Nathan Barrett's company of Concord Militia, also saw where the ball threw up the water about the middle of the river. Then a second and third shot. Significantly, Blood also remembered that just before a gun was fired, a British officer rode up. Who was this man on horseback? By all accounts, Captain Laurie was not mounted, nor it seems were his brother officers. Except, quite possibly, for Lieutenant William Sutherland. It is impossible to know with certainty where and when Sutherland was mounted. If he indeed stopped, as he reported, and raised the first plank in destroying the bridge, he had to have been on foot at that point. What is almost certain, however, is that the first shot came from the British side, which is over on that side, right there. Captain Laurie himself reported as much to General Gage in an after-action report. I imagine myself that a man of my company, afterwards killed, did first fire his piece. And for his part, Sutherland was as adamant about the initial shot at Concord as he was about the first shot at Lexington. He claimed that the rebels had fired first at a cluster of men he was trying to form near the bridge, and implied that he himself was dismounted at the time. But so when the rebels fired, or the Minutemen militia fired upon the British, it without a doubt sent them back a bit. And the first couple volleys were fired from this area here that I'm at, and then fired along here as well. And during that time, more and more men are coming from around the area, giving and around that time, more men are coming in, giving replenishment. Around that time, more men are reinforcing the militiamen and the Minutemen of Concord. The British will eventually be overwhelmed here, and they will just retreat. Yes, Americans will die here, British will die here, and now will begin one of the most bloodiest retreats ever in British history, at least in this war. And reading it in this book almost was movie-like. It was theatrical. How Walter R. Borneman wrote this, of what's to come. And we're gonna go visit one of those sites in the next video. But I would like to give my take again on being here. Coming to these battlefields. I've been to Gettysburg. I've been to Fredericksburg. I've been to Yorktown. I've been to Spotsylvania Courthouse. To be at the spot where it all started for the American Revolution, I feel very overwhelmed with emotion. I can't even describe it. This is it. This is that place. Like, to be here and know the hardships that are going to come with this war. The losses on both sides. You know, war isn't fun. War is not pretty. War is not, war is not something to glorify. Sometimes war has to happen. For the Americans' cause, this was it. This was the what do you call? This is everything being bottled up, and now finally it's all coming out. Now this is the climax. This is the breaking point of the American people, where if all else fails, war happens. I remember a lesson my history professor taught me at college. War is when politics and diplomacy stop. Now, diplomacy did happen, and it was occurring all the time, but war is where you can't go past it. You can't keep pressing on diplomacy. It's where it ends. It's where you can't find any common ground. That's where you get war. And this is that breaking point. This was, America had enough. This was it. This is, you come, you kill us, we're fighting back now. That's it. There's no going back. And this war is going to last 8 years, and it's going to be hell for both sides. And America will come out the victors. We're going to have the French after Saratoga. We're going to have the battles at Trenton, the battles at Princeton, and Brandywine, the losses, and Paoli. But we want to have victories at Yorktown. Hardships. But it all begins right here. And to me, that is overwhelmingly just overwhelming. So yeah. And this is my first time here too. And just looking at the bridge, I know it's a reconstructed bridge, but that is something. This river was here. These fields were here. All of this was here. Most of it, at least, that I'm seeing in this vicinity was here. The house is no longer here. Something happened to it. But yeah. I'll see you in the next video. If you like this, please like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.